Hi, today we're going to learn how to use VPN to stay secure and private online. Wow, this is a tough job. Just kidding. When you use NordVPN, all it takes is just a single click. See for yourself. Click, and you're browsing securely on public Wi-Fi. Click, your ISP can't see what you do online. Click, and you're in a different country. Well, virtually. Any device you have there, NordVPN has you covered. Everything else is just details. But if you care to know more, NordVPN has more than 5,000 servers all over the world. It protects your sensitive data with advanced encryption, shields you from malware and phishing sites, and keeps no logs of your online activity.
Click link in the description and get 68% discount for your first order. Choosing your art and frames. Use pieces of art that are identical in size to keep things simple. Select at least 4 images, paintings or photos that are identical in size. You can use a variety of images so long as they can be arranged in a uniform grid. For example, you can use 9 images to make a 3 by 3 grid or 8 images to make a 4 by 2 grid. You cannot use 3, 7, or 11 images though, since they cannot be arranged in an even grid. It is possible to create a grid wall with differently sized pieces of art if you get oversized frames that match, but this generally doesn't look as good or uniform. A grid gallery wall can be 2 by 2, 4 by 4, or 6 by 6 if you're looking for a perfect square. You can also make a horizontal or vertical grid that is 2 by 3, 2 by 4, or 2 by 6. Vertical grids are great for columns and small walls, while horizontal grids do well on larger walls. Select images that tell a story or have a similar tone for a cohesive look. One option is to select pieces that have a unifying theme, tone, or story. For example, you make a grid wall out of family photos, abstract paintings, or charcoal sketches. Make sure that each image works with one another to create a feeling of uniformity. You can also use images made by a single artist, or stick with a sequence of images that show the progression of your family over time. This is a great choice if you want the pieces to work together like a single piece of art. Pick different pieces of art to create a more chaotic look. Choose images that are radically different from one another to showcase them as individual pieces in one place. This is a great way to display a large collection of interesting images on a prominent wall on your home. If you go with this option, choose a variety of photos, drawings, or paintings that have nothing in common with one another. Buy identical frames from the same manufacturer and add your art. Purchase frames that are the same style and size for your pieces. The goal of a grid gallery wall is to create a symmetrical and even look, which is hard to achieve if all of your frames are different. Choose a style of frame that looks good to you. Remove the backing on each frame to install the images in their frames. You don't have to frame the art if you don't want to, but framed art and photography always looks cleaner. Although you can certainly hang unframed canvases for an industrial or textured look. Creating your grid, measure the size of the wall to see how big your grid should be. Use a measuring tape to find the total length of the wall. Then, determine how much space you want between the edges of the grid and the edges of the wall. You have total freedom here, so choose the gaps based on what looks good to you. Your grid can be right in the middle of your wall, or it can take up a smaller, asymmetrical section. It's completely up to you. Set your frames out on the ground in a grid. Put every image on the ground in the grid pattern that you'd like. Choose between a horizontal or vertical arrangement based on how you think the images will look on the wall. If you have 4 or 8 images, see if they look better in a square or rectangle. Do this on a carpet, or put a large towel underneath your images to protect your floor. Rearrange the order of the images to match the style you're going for. Once you've chosen a grid pattern, swap your images around to put them in an order. If you're going for a uniform look, arrange your pieces in chronological or linear way. For a more random look, pay attention to the colors and swap the images around until the colors are evenly distributed across all of your pieces. There's no right or wrong way to do this, so choose an order that looks good to you. If you're hanging various family photos and you're making a row or vertical column, place the most meaningful photos near the center of the grid. Make minor adjustments so that the gap between each piece is equal. Use a measuring tape to move the frames slightly to line up the gaps. While there are no hard rules, the gap between each piece should probably be between 1/6 inches 2.5 15.2 cm. Use your measuring tape to check each gap at the top, bottom, and side of each frame to make sure they are perfect. The closer your images are to one another, the more the pieces will appear as a single piece of art on your wall. Hanging your art, cut pieces of paper out to match the size of each frame. You can trace the edges of the frame by placing a frame on top of the paper and cutting around it with a utility knife. Alternatively, you can outline the frame with a pen before removing the frame and trimming the paper to size with a paper cutter. Avoid using scissors, since it will be hard to get clean, perfect lines. It's much easier to do this if you use colored paper. Brown butcher's paper is perfect for this. Use painter's tape to mark the borders of the grid. Measure the length and the height of the grid on your ground. Line your measuring tape up on the wall and put a small hash mark at the top, bottom, and both sides where the edges of the grid will be. Then, put a piece of painter's tape along each border. Use a level to ensure that each piece is straight. This is much easier if you have someone helping you out, since one person can hold the measuring tape or level and the other person can make the marks or apply the tape. Use a pencil to make your hash marks so that you can erase it when you're done. Measure from the top and side of a frame to the mounting bracket. Flip one of your frames over and use a measuring tape to calculate the distance from the top of the frame to the hole where the nail will go. Then, measure the distance from the side of the frame to the bracket. Make a mark on each piece of paper that matches your measurements. On each paper cutout, measure from the top of the paper to where the mounting bracket goes. Make a light hash mark to track the height from the top. Then, move your measuring tape to measure the distance from the side of the paper to the center of the page. Make a dark hash mark to indicate where the nail for each frame goes. Repeat this process on every sheet of paper to create a template for the grid. Double-check each measurement before moving on. The grid won't look very good if there are inconsistent gaps between each piece on your wall. So the template must be near perfect for this to look great. Tape your templates to the wall with painter's tape to match the grid. Start at a corner. Hang your first piece of paper on the wall with painter's tape. Use the painter's tape you added around the exterior border of the grid wall to line your paper up perfectly. Then, use a measuring tape to place an adjacent piece of paper so that the gap between the two pieces of paper matches the gap between images on the ground. Continue doing this until you've added every piece of paper to the wall. Inspect each gap with your measuring tape and make minor adjustments. Inspect the wall to see if any pieces of paper are uneven or hanging at an angle. Use your level to make sure that every piece is perfectly straight. Then, use your measuring tape to check each gap between the papers to make sure that they match the grid on your floor. Pull off pieces of paper and reattach them as needed until the grid is perfect. Hammer your nails into the wall and remove the paper. Take a nail and hold it over the hash mark you made on your paper. Hammer it into the wall gently by tapping the back of the nail head. If you're using a screw, use a drill to slowly drive it through the wall. Add a nail or screw to each piece of paper where you made dark hash marks. Once the screws or nails are in your wall, peel off the tape and rip off the pieces of paper. The screws must all hang at the same angle, so do your best to keep them level with one another. Use wall anchors if your frames weigh more than 10 pounds 2.34.5 kg. Hang your pieces on the wall. Take the frame on the ground at the top left off of the floor. Take it to your wall and slide the bracket over your hook. Then, grab the piece that was next to it on the ground and hang it next to your first piece. Continue doing this until your images are perfectly lined up on the wall to finish your grid gallery wall. Remove any remaining pieces of painter's tape and erase any hash marks you made on the wall. Tilt individual pieces that hang unevenly by sliding them gently on the wall.